There we go. When we hooked up to PCs, we always said hook up what last? We always said hook up the power last, okay? So my question to you is, why do we always say to hook up the power last on a PC? I said, no, never plug in the power until you're all the way done, you get everything plugged in. But why?
Because once you plug it in, it runs through and see what's there and what's not.
Okay, excellent. It starts the boot process, and in particular, it starts to run the BIOS, okay? And one of the things BIOS does is it inventories your system and finds out what all's there, right? And if we plug in the power, and then we go, hey, move my stuff. I even have this stuff down here on purpose to show you guys stuff. If we plug in the power before everything's ready, and it does that inventory, then we've lost whatever we plug in later because BIOS hands off that list to the operating system. So I just wanted to kind of connect what we had done before there real quick. So when I push the power button on my PC, when I've got it plugged in and we'll pretend it wasn't set to boot automatically, I push this power button on the PC. What's the first thing that happens when I push the power button?
Post?
No. It's the very first thing when I push the power button. First thing that gets checked before anything else can get checked. Okay, let's write about our reading. I'm going to go to our reading and bring up that article so that you can see what's the first thing that it says it does. Number one on this list, and it should be in your list, in your notebook for when you take the test. Okay, the number one is it checks the power supply. Okay, the first thing that happens is it has to do that internal power supply check. PSU stands for power supply unit, okay? Power supply check, okay? Does that power supply check for good power? If it doesn't have good power, nothing else happens after that. It's done, okay? This PC right here, we got 20 of these awesome PCs from the Air Force. They're Pentium 2 duals, they have 4 memory slots, they're small form factor. And when I push this power button, what's happening? Absolutely nothing is happening, okay? And in fact, on this particular PC, this motherboard blinks yellow or green depending on whether the power supply is good. If it's yellow, it's bad. So it doesn't get past that. When I get here, in this case, I have a blinking yellow light. In the case of many other computers, you get nothing. There's no fan turning. There's no other lights coming on. Nothing's happening. I can push this all day. And every single one of these had, oh, don't bring your junk back here. What? Oh, you don't have an X block.
Well, I do, but
Well,
I understand. I had to bring all this back first.
Okay. Here, go over to the other room. Wind the mice up and put them in there. Are some of those mice USB?
One is, yeah, that one.
Why didn't you use it?
Because I
Put the
don't know all
PS2
the
mice in there. Okay. In fact, put them in here. This should be all PS2 mice.
And the keyboards go there.
And the keyboards, no, I really don't want them there. They just keep them stacked there. Start a new stack. And 209 closet. Okay. So anyways, every single one of them has bad power supply. Okay, what does that tell me about where they came from? It was a crappy old building. That's what it tells me. Because the first thing that usually goes bad on a PC is the power supply. Because all the electricity comes in through one cord into one item. And if it's absorbing all the bad power, we used to have terrible power in this building. The lights used to flicker all the time. We lost power about once a month. Every teacher kept a flashlight ready with batteries in it because we'd be sitting here in the dark again. And by the way, this room is really, really dark when it's dark. Okay, I do have a window, so we could see light coming through out there. Okay, but that's light that's coming through if it's coming through. If it's stormy outside, what happened to it? Dark. Anyway, so the power supply absorbs a lot of stuff. And so the first thing that gets checked is it does that internal check on the power supply. If the internal check on the power supply is good, it continues on to that next step. Okay, now in the article it says that basically it starts executing stuff, okay? and the motherboard starts up right there on step 2, and it tells you some stuff that's going on here, and I'm going to tell you what my synopsis of a very wordy section right there. Okay, when I push this and it does the power supply check, that's when the motherboard starts. Okay, and I want you to think of it like a racetrack. That's when it gets the green light. When it gets the green light, that's when the motherboard starts doing the clock pulses, and the clock pulses just provide the conduit for information to start going around the motherboard. It doesn't mean there is any information. In fact, there's very little right then, right? But it just says, okay, we're on now. You can go. Whoever needs to go can go now. So now the motherboard's starting up, starts to generate the clock pulses at whatever speed that motherboard runs at, because everybody has to move together, okay, before it goes on to the next thing. And really the next thing is, so, and that's really saying that the motherboard starts, okay, and then it loads the BIOS, okay? Loads the BIOS, which stands for Basic Input Output System. That's not in your notes. It should be, because I guarantee that's a test question. Okay, so it loads the basic input output system, and that is a program that's stored where? Yes, write it and I'll sign it. There should be one on my desk. Program that's stored where? It's a program that never goes away no matter how many times we turn off a computer. So would it be stored in RAM or ROM? ROM, okay? So it's stored in ROM. In particular, what ROM? CMOS ROM, okay? So this is a program that's stored in CMOS ROM. BIOS is a program that loads from CMOS ROM, okay? It cannot go away because we lose power. Now, I told first class that just because it's ROM doesn't mean you can't ever write to it. Obviously, the program had to be written there at some point, right? So you can reprogram the BIOS and the BIOS ROM. These computers right here have a bunch of different versions of BIOS, and one of the things we've been doing is we've been updating them, is we've been updating it to the current BIOS. Now, I will tell you that if you ever go to update BIOS, if the power goes out in the middle of updating the BIOS, if it's writing this code, rewriting this code in ROM, and the power goes out, you've just ruined your computer forever. It's worthless. Because the first thing it does when you turn it on is it loads that program. How are you going to run the motherboard again to load the program if the program didn't load in the first place? And so when you look at motherboard sites, it says you should not reprogram BIOS unless BIOS is not working correctly, or unless there's some feature you want. And that's because if, while you're doing this, you lose power, you lost your motherboard. Because there's no way to pull it and redo it that I'm capable of doing. Okay? Not that you couldn't. Manufacturer probably could, but that's probably more than the motherboard costs. So if you're doing it, don't do it during a thunderstorm. Don't do it at your house if your power is questionable, unless you have a backup power supply or something that it can run from. You're usually safe with laptops because they have a battery. It won't even let you start it unless they're plugged in. But if the power goes out in the middle, you're usually okay. Okay, but there's a caveat with that. So BIOS loads from CMOS ROM, and the first thing it runs is the post, okay? So the post is run by BIOS, okay? So what is the post doing? What does post stand for? You're allowed to look at your notes and reference them, because if the answer's not in your notes, it should be being written in your notes. Why is your notebook not out? Thank you very much. Okay, because if it's not there, it should be. And when I say it should be is when I tell you what it means, you should be writing it down. There is nothing I am saying today that will not be covered by the test because we have a short class period. I would not waste your time with extraneous information. Okay, it's the power on self-test. So that it does, is it right there? Right there in your notes. And if you only had it out, you would have sounded so much smarter because you would have done it right away. Okay, is it post is run by BIOS. It tests stuff. It tests our motherboard. It tests our CPU. It tests our memory. And if we fail the post, what do we get from our articles we read last class? Beeps. We get beeps, okay? So I'm going to hook up a good motherboard now. I mean, a good power supply to this motherboard. And I'm going to let us hear some beeps. Now, the beeps can be of different pitches. They can sound a little different with different motherboards. Sometimes they're different frequencies. Sometimes there's different numbers of beeps. And that article you read talked about the beep codes. So this time I got green. You hear it? It's not super loud. What do you think that beep is? From your reading, what's the most prevalent reason we get a beep?
PC is booting normally.
What?
I got the PC booting normally.
Well, we don't get a beep if it's PC booting normally. The reason we don't, or we do get a beep, the most prevalent reason, what is it?
BIOS problems?
What is it? I'm giving you a hint.
Memory.
Memory is the most prevalent reason that we get a beep. Okay, normally we don't get a beep from the power supply. We just don't get anything if it's the power supply normally. You saw when I had the bad power supply hooked up, it just did nothing. Okay, power supply problems usually either it doesn't work at all or it works for a while and then shuts down. Okay, because the first thing it did on the power supply is it tested to see whether the power supply was any good. And it thought it was good, or it didn't, and if it thought it was good, it started up. If it didn't think it was good, it didn't start up. This one is no good, this one is good. But this computer has no memory in it, so it started beeping. So if I put my memory in, and I plug it back in, and I turn it on, now I don't get any beeping. Okay? Now you saw, I don't know if you were paying attention, but when I did this, initially when I plugged it in, came on for a second, and when I first plugged it in, it came on for a second and it checked. When I do that, it goes and it checks, the power supply's good, and it starts doing its thing, starts loading BIOS, and if I had a video hooked up, which I could not do. Let me see if I got. If I'm gonna get. There we go. There's our BIOS loading. There's no keyboard. Blah blah blah. But if I did this whole process, let me do the whole thing. It happens so fast, right? Checks the power supply, starts generating pulses, start loading the BIOS, starts doing the post. This is actually the BIOS loading, and it starts running the post. And then what's it do? Okay, so it runs our power on self-test, and it checks what things that we think are available, or what it sees available. What's the next thing it does? Okay, so the BIOS performs the power on self-test, then the arrows, that's when we get the beep codes. And I will tell you, the beep codes are different for different BIOSes and different motherboards, but generally, 2 beeps usually is bad memory. And that's the most prevalent beep one that you're going to hear. So beep, beep. And it might keep doing it forever. It might go beep, 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 beep forever, but that's still 2 beeps. Just because it kept doing it doesn't mean you keep counting. You be counting really high. Okay? So then the BIOS looks to see if there's a video card, and sometimes video cards have their own BIOS that it has to execute next. Looks for all those other devices, okay? And it starts displaying something on the screen, which is what we've got over on this BIOS now, okay? Then it does an inventory of our system, okay? Now this all happens really fast, but this is where if we had plugged it in before and started the system before we had everything connected to it, if it doesn't catch it in the system inventory, it may never catch it. If you plug in an old PS2 keyboard, after the system has started and done its inventory, almost all the time, I have seen it happen before, so I won't say all the time, it will never recognize that PS2 device ever on the operating system. Corey, why are you dropping screws all over the floor?
I don't know.
Okay, so this is where it goes in and it finds out what things are available. Do I have a CD-ROM? Do I have a hard drive? Do I have a floppy drive? What kind of memory do I have? How much memory do I have? And the BIOS is going and compiling that information of everything that's available on the computer. Okay, so it's done that inventory that it looks for. And after it's gone and found all those things, it's gone through our startup screen, it's gone and found the inventory, then it goes, and we don't really hit this where it says step 9, it goes and doles out resources. Okay, so it passes out resources. And I will tell you, I really don't spend any time on this. Back when I first started, there's things called IRQs and DMAs, and there's limited number of interrupt request controllers. There's a limited amount of memory in there, and it has to figure out who gets what. This video card gets so many resources allocated to it. And it used to be we had to go in and set who got what in BIOS. So we would say you get IRQ 6 and you get IRQ 7. But anymore, everything's plug and play. And plug and play means I put it in and it works. Okay? BIOS is smart enough now to hand out those resources on the fly as it starts. And it is possible that some things are incompatible. Sometimes if you put two devices together, they both want the same resource and only one of them will work. That's why when we go and put an add-in video card in, it doesn't work if you plug it into the old one. Is the old one broken? No. But there's not enough resources for it to say, okay, all video gets to play. So it goes and doesn't allocate any resources to that integrated video card.
Teachers for the interruption. Just a reminder to all staff that they are giving the flu shots over in the elementary conference room from 10 to noon today. Just a reminder. Thank you.
Maybe I should go do that. So it goes and allocates resources, and if it doesn't have enough, some things may not work. That so rarely happens anymore. I mean, in general, it's smart enough to go and figure out what gets to work what, but it's possible that some things are incompatible, okay? So if you add something new and it doesn't work, one of the possibilities is there are not enough resources on your PC, especially if you've got a lot of crap. You've got a lot of stuff on your PC. You've got a couple modems, and you've got a couple extra USBs, and you've got a computer that's got a whole bunch of extra slots, and you've got them all filled. You begin to come to the point where maybe it doesn't have the resources. So I don't really test you on what IRQs are and what DMA requests are. I just want you to know that there are limited amounts of resources, and it goes and the BIOS goes and allocates those resources out as to what's going to get what, okay? So when it goes and does the plug and play stuff and it allocates those resources, it is a finite amount of resources, okay? So then it goes and looks for it's gone and tested everything, it's found everything, it's allocated out the resources, and now it wants to look for the boot device, okay? How does it look for the boot device? Who tells it where to look for the boot device? BIOS tells BIOS where to look for the device? Who tells it where to look for the boot device? Corey does. How does Corey tell it where to look for the boot device? By setting the, we did this the other day, we were playing with BIOS, we set the boot order, okay? Okay? And that boot order is something that we set and we saved, right? We had to hit save when we left BIOS. We set that boot order and we saved it. And where did we save it? We saved it. We saved it in a RAM or ROM? ROM! RAM, right? Because if we saved it, we have to save it in RAM, okay? Because it means we easily write to it all the time. And what RAM did we save it to? Okay, so it really is interchangeable here, whether we call it BIOS or CMOS RAM. It's technically BIOS ROM, or RAM, okay? It's BIOS RAM that's held in place by the... It's held in place because it's RAM, right? And what does RAM require to keep its memory? If I want to keep the information that's in RAM, I require what? I require, here, I drew this picture last class. It requires power, okay? In order to keep stuff in RAM, power is required, okay? Power is required. And where does it get the power? Does it get it from the wall? No. Where does it get the power? Because we want it to be there all the time. Even if we move our PC, we don't want to have to reprogram the BIOS. That's where we get it. We get it from the CMOS battery that is not in this computer, because I obviously scavenged it and used it somewhere else. Okay, so the information is in BIOS RAM, held there by the CMOS battery. Okay, so if I said, what holds the boot sequence in RAM, the answer is the CMOS battery. If I say, what does the CMOS battery save, you would say the information in BIOS RAM. Got it? It's a question that gets answered wrong all the time in this test, just so you know. Okay? So, CMOS ROM holds the BIOS program because it doesn't change. BIOS RAM holds the boot order, the boot sequence, the information that you save in BIOS, and it's held there by the CMOS battery. Okay? Because you have to have power to hold things in RAM. Okay? So, it looks for the boot order that Corey set in BIOS, and it says, what you got for me? And so, the first thing we normally set here is the boot order is the CD-ROM. And it goes to the CD-ROM. It says, you got anything there? And the CD-ROM says, I got nothing. Okay? And so, it goes from the CD-ROM, and it goes to the next thing in the boot order. And it just goes and looks there. And it goes to the hard drive. And the hard drive goes, I got an OS. And it goes, okay, you win, yay! And it hands off control to the OS. So the BIOS then hands off control to the OS. And as it's doing that, it also hands off all the inventory and the resources that it's already figured out. Okay, it's already said, I got a PS2 keyboard, I got a PS2 mouse, I got this hard drive, I got this CD-ROM, I got this much memory. And it tells the BIOS as it loads, it says, here's what I've got for you to play with today. Which is why even if I plug in a PS2 keyboard later, the operating system may not find it because the BIOS didn't tell it. Now the BIOS also hands off the list of USB, and USB is plug and play, which is why it says, hey, here's the USB ports that you have. And the operating system later will go, hey, I got something new in this port. Because it actually did already give it a resource. And it's USB, which is plug and play. So I have people go, but I can plug in my USB keyboard later. Yeah, but BIOS already told it was there. It didn't know it was a keyboard. It says, I got this spot that you can put things. And PS2 doesn't fall into that. It's not a, I got something for later. It's I got something now. It's not supposed to be plug and play. So BIOS hands off to the operating system. The operating system is another, starts with a P that I'm looking for. Program. It's another program just like BIOS, and it's our big kahuna program, right? It's the big one that we're going to load up. The OS stands for operating system. And it is the big program that gives us our GUI. Remember what GUI stands for? Graphical user interface, okay? It's the program that gives us our graphical user interface that lets us interact with all that cool hardware that we bought at Best Buy, okay? Because without this operating system, if we only had BIOS, we'd have a neat screen like this that says, I got nothing, okay? BIOS loaded, it's done, and it says, I don't know, I can't find anything else, I'm done. It's got to be able to find, when it goes to the boot order, an operating system out there for us to get our cool graphical user interface to interact with the rest of our system. Okay, so our operating system loads. And when our operating system loads, it's now going to be the portal between us and the hardware, okay? So the OS and the hardware, right? Our OS is our way to get to our hardware. But what is the piece in between that lets the OS use the hardware? There's a little piece. There is software, but what specifically is that software called?
DDR.
Okay, without the right device drivers, which is also software. Okay, device drivers are software or programs that allow the operating system to use the hardware. Now, when we load up stuff, when we loaded up Linux the other day, did everything work when we loaded up Linux? Yeah, we could get on the internet, we could use the keyboard, the screen functioned, right? That's not because it didn't need device drivers, it's because that version of Linux was already smart enough and it had the device drivers built in to the operating system install. And when we install Windows 7, it says finding drivers. And what it's doing is it's going through its own CD or DVD, and it's going, hey, you know what this is? Oh, I know what this is. The programmers told me a long time ago, back in 2011, when I was programmed, what this device driver was. Okay, but if the operating system doesn't already have it, then it doesn't work. Okay, so when I go and put in a cool new video card, and it comes up, just because I see it on the screen doesn't mean it's really working. Because if the operating system doesn't have the correct device driver, it will try to use something else. And it will say standard VGA controller, okay? Which what it means is really crappy video until you fix me. I can see it, but I can't see it good. If I come up with a standard VGA controller with a video card, when it comes up, it'll be really big and blown up and everything's ginormous. I'm like, why does it look like crap? And all the colors look like it's from back in the 1970s. Because it doesn't have the right drivers. Because the operating system will try to use the hardware anyway. It'll say, if I can't find the right one, I'll use one that I think is close enough. And if it can't find one that's close enough, it'll just say, I don't work. So when I go here with the Windows pause break on my computer and I look at the device manager, okay, all my stuff works right now because there's nothing on there. But I might see something with, and these are all the drivers, by the way. If I go to my, man, it is still being really sluggish from that download. If I go to my display adapters, it's got an NVIDIA GeForce 210, and one of the things that I can do on here if I need to, if it will let me, because this download is making my PC so slow. There we go. I can go and I can look at the drivers for this one, and it will tell me what drivers I have loaded for this. It's NVIDIA driver version 9, 18, 13, 14, 22 that was made on March 14th, 2013. And if I want to, I can click right here and try to update the driver. And if it's not working right, I can click right here and try to roll it back to the last driver that I had loaded. Because maybe you load new drivers and now it's worse than it was before. So it lets you try to roll back to the last one that you had loaded. You can't keep rolling. You can only roll back the last one. Okay? So this right here is what's making this program that I have access to is what's making my video card function correctly. And if I didn't have this loaded, I guarantee I would still be able to see but I would not be able to see as well, and I wouldn't have all the settings my video card has, okay? So those drivers are software programs that allow the operating system to correctly interact with the hardware. You don't have to always load. Sometimes the default ones are great and they work fine. And when I load Windows 7, I go and let it do everything, and then I go and look at the device manager. I can get it to come up. There we go. There we go. I look at the device manager and I look for little yellow asterisks that'll come up, and you'll see, and it will be expanded. Like if this wasn't loaded, this would already be expanded with the circle, yellow asterisk, and it'll say video controller or unknown video device or something like that. Okay? So that's what those device drivers are. And as we get into different hardware sections, we will actually download and install device drivers. When we get to video, you're all going to download. You're going to go to the website and download some video drivers and stuff to get used to doing that. But right now, you just need to know that they are programs that you find on manufacturers' websites to make the software works. Okay, don't get up. I got to make sure that we got to all of our ICANN statements. Okay, operating system is and does. It's a big program that lets us interact. Device driver does. Lets us work on our hardware. OS uses BIOS information. I went over that on how it hands us off. The BIOS, how is it configured? Through those steps that we use, and we save it to RAM, which held by the CMOS battery. We went through the boot steps, and we explained how ROM BIOS finds the OS and finds it through that boot order that we have set. And those are all the things that you're going to be tested on Tuesday. Make sure you have your notes. If you didn't copy articles in your notes, please take time to do that in case there's something I didn't go over.